10 of Self-Esteem and Peak Performance by Jack Canfield. On this side, you will hear Jack's answers to a wide range of questions pertaining to building and maintaining healthy self-esteem, including how do you give yourself a quick self-esteem check? How can you build a more positive attitude? And how can you channel anger towards a positive outcome? Here's Jack Canfield with Questions and Answers, Part 1, as Career Track's Self-Esteem and Peak Performance continues.
Wouldn't it be more effective to confront negative thoughts that come into your head rather than deflect or cancel them?
Well, let me answer that in two ways, yes and no, okay? And now let me expand on that. Yes, in the sense that much of what comes up in our head as negative thoughts come from the past, okay? Like they come from past programming from your parents. Like I might be doing something and I hear this little voice says, I'm stupid. Well, where did I originally get that? Sometimes I decided I was stupid because of something that happened to me. Sometimes people told me, you're stupid. Now, why don't we have such a stupid kid? You know, if your brain wasn't attached, you know, you'd probably forget it, that kind of thing. So what happens there is that confronting that as an internal process where I might go inside and say, well, wait, where did I get that? Well, that comes from my father. Well, my father wasn't always right. Maybe I don't need to listen to that. You know, my father was upset when he told me that. I'll give you an example of a time in a seminar when I was working with a person who was very stiff and had no sense of humor. And it turned out that when he was a little kid, as we were talking, you know, his self-talk was, oh, I shouldn't say that. He was going to say something funny, then I shouldn't say that. And so we shared that with the group and we started to process it. What we realized was that when he was a little child, he had been out on a playground. And he had a kid come up to him and say, go take a long walk off a short pier. And they thought it was funny. And he didn't know it wasn't funny. He didn't know it was funny. He just didn't know what it was. So he laughed because he wanted to be, you know, approved of. And he goes home that night, and his father said something to him at the dinner table, and he thought he'd say something to see if his father would laugh. So he said, Dad, go take a long walk off a short pier. And his dad freaked out. You know, he just wasn't in the mood to be talked back to that way. The kid didn't even know he'd done it. But he smacked the kid and said, you go to your room and you think about what you said. Well, the kid goes to his room, and what he thinks about is, wow, can't win. You know, I better not ever try to be funny again, okay? So whenever a funny thought would come to him, he would censor it, if you will, with a negative thought. And so that kind of getting in touch with that literally can root out the source of that thought. But my experience is, in a day-to-day level, it's not that easy to do that. The thought comes up, and given that you're in the middle of a staff meeting, or you're about to say something, or you're in a conversation with somebody, you don't always have the time to confront, if you will, that thought and analyze it to death back to where it came from. It's something you can do on your own. But in a day-to-day situation, I teach people, as I did earlier in the program, to say things like cancel, cancel when a negative thought comes up, and then replace it with a positive thought. Or if the negative thought is coming from someone else, to say silently to yourself, no matter what you say or do to me, I'm still a worthwhile person, and just let that kind of, you know, as our parents taught us, let it run off your back like water off a duck's back, and just let it go. So I think in general, it's valuable to do that if you have the time, and if you have the resources and the commitment for that kind of inner work. It's very valuable. But in general, I find most people can't do that without some kind of help, either from a friend, a facilitator, or a counselor.
I set goals constantly. The problem is I can't keep committed to them for more than 1 week. How can I keep as motivated as when I first set the goal?
Well, see, I think there's a lot of different things to look at in the question. You know, I set goals constantly. If you're setting goals constantly, then are you setting little objectives constantly that are part of your bigger goals, or are you setting too many goals? Like, I've met people that overwhelm themselves by having too many goals. Their goals are unrealistic. And so they constantly set them. They're unrealistic. They can't achieve them, so they set some others. And they're great goal setters, but they're not completers. And what I like to look at is what I call the cycle of completion. You have to set a goal and then, you know, begin it, if you will, and then continue the activity and complete it. And so I think if someone has trouble completing goals, much like, if you know, going to aerobics or going to the gym, I wouldn't suggest you go in and try to bench press 450 pounds the first day. You might, you know, strain a muscle or two. Probably drop the barbells on your chest and crush yourself. And the same is true with goals. Like, we wouldn't take a little kid and put him on a big bicycle. You know, we put him on a little tiny tricycle maybe, or a bicycle with trainer wheels, and build up that strength inside in terms of achieving the goal. So I would say, look at your goals and ask yourself, do I have too many? And if you've got a whole bunch you're not achieving, the answer is probably yes, okay, for now. And we can build up that strength. The other thing is to look at the priorities of your goals. Sometimes people set a whole bunch of goals. They don't prioritize them. Like, what's the most important? If you could only achieve one goal, what would it be? You know, when I do seminars on a weekend for people that come for intensive, deep personal growth in the area of self-esteem, I'll ask them to make a list of 10 things they'd like from the seminar. And then I tell them a genie just showed up, and he said he can grant you any 3, so now you got to go back and pick 3. And then I say the genie really lied. He's a genie in training, and so he only can grant you 1 wish. What would the 1 be? And so it helps people like narrow it down to 1. When you've got 1 clear goal you're working on and everything else is secondary, that can be a great way to start getting clear and prioritized and focused with your goals. Another thing I see with people that have too many goals is that sometimes their goals come from a place of lack inside. They set goals out of a place of I'm not enough, so I have to have these things to be enough. And you can never get enough of that because that won't give you what you want. In other words, I say you can never get enough of what you don't really need. So if you're eating food that isn't giving you the nutrition you need, you'll keep eating more of it, but no matter how much you eat, you'll never get what you want because it's the wrong, minerals or vitamins or whatever you're looking for. And the same is true if you're achieving goals that aren't really nurturing you in terms of what you need and want from your sense of expressing yourself into the world rather than from the sense of lack. Then you'll start to see that life gets real different in terms of your goal setting. Let me say 2 other things about achieving goals. One is that a lot of people don't have what I call the support they need for achieving goals. Like, probably the thing that leaped me the most, quantum leaped me, was having a buddy. Now, I have a buddy named Martin Root, and Martin lives in Toronto. And Martin is the guy that I go to when I need what I call the compassionate kill. When I need someone to say, look, Canfield, get off it. I don't want to hear that. You've been running that number for a year. When are you going to achieve this? What assistance do you need? How are you going to get it? I'll call you in a week to see how you're doing. See, because he assists me in getting what I say I want, rather than doing what I think I want, which is kind of just lazing around, being a couch potato. So if I'm not achieving my goals, then I will call Martin and say, look, Martin, I got a really important thing I need to do. I need to get a script done for a tape, or I need to get a book outline, to Macmillan or something by a certain date. And I want you to know I've committed to that goal. See, because if I know Martin knows, Martin isn't going to let me off the hook. And when I start to get sick, or I get, I'm too overwhelmed, or I'm taking on too much other business, Martin will attack me. But because he loves me, see? And so you need someone. Good friend of mine was in a relationship with me and 2 other people in a support group of 4 people. And we would call each other every Monday, and we would set out our objectives for the week. And then we would call each other on Thursday and check in how we were doing, and then coach each other about how to get things done. And this woman had been wanting to write a book for 3 or 5 years. She'd been talking about writing this book on the body work that she does as a massage therapist and restructuring of the body, muscle, or system. And so she said that there was going to be this ABA convention in town, the American Book Sellers Association, and that she should go. And but she was chicken. And then she had all these reasons why not to. Her car had broken down. She had her foot was hurt or something. And the people in the group started saying, look, I'll take you. Well, I don't know what to do when I get there. Well, let's find out when you get there. We'll work it out. Now, normally she would have just stayed at home and not gone. But because the 3 of us were supporting her, one friend drove her down, another friend went with her, met her there at her, and they coached her through it. By the 5th bookseller she had talked to, she had sold her book. See? Now, it could be 2 years later and she still wouldn't have sold her book. So it's someone that will support you in achieving your goals, having that support system. One other thing that I found is to build in negative consequences. Another person wanted to quit smoking, and they said if they don't quit smoking, the next time they smoke a cigarette, if anyone catches them or they catch themselves, they will write a $500 check and give it to the group, and they're going to go out and have a party. Okay? So the idea of people partying on my $500 keeps me invested in getting the goal done. So that's the kind of thing you can do.
Can one person be a support group, and why or why not?
Well, support's critical. And if all you can get's one person, then go for it, okay? But there's more power in a group. Because a group has many more people in it, there are going to be people that can see different sides of you that other people can't because of who they are. And so I think let's take a deeper net. I would say it depends on the quality of the people. Let's say you were going to play basketball and your support group was Magic Johnson, okay? I'd rather have one Magic Johnson than 5 local high school kids being in my support group, okay? And the reason for that is the quality of the support. So the first thing you want to do is look at what's the quality of the support you're getting and try to get people that are really going to push you. In other words, don't get people in your support group who you're going to be super comfortable with and you're going to support their weakness and they're going to support your weakness. Try to get people who are going in the same direction you are, maybe even just a little bit ahead of you, so that what they'll do is pull you with them, okay? Now, one person can work, though. As I've said, I think earlier, that if you have one person that you're in that constant contact with, let's say weekly or a couple times a week, that relationship can literally transform your life because of the conscious attention to goals and being accountable. The power of a group, again, is that I may also have contacts that you don't have. So let's say that one of your goals is to start your own business. And maybe my uncle's a banker. And maybe another person in the group, they have a brother who is head of the Small Business Bureau. And someone else has a cousin who just started their own business, and they can give you feedback about how they did that. So the more resources that are in your group, the more powerful it can become. I think it was Napoleon Hill in his book Think and Grow Rich talked about having a mastermind group. And he was really looking at Andrew Carnegie, who had an accountant, a lawyer, another corporate president, people like that, who could really work with him and bring in perspectives to his thinking he wouldn't normally have. So it's good to have as many perspectives in the group as possible. Let me say one more thing about support groups, and that is if you decide to create a support group or you join one, I'll share with you a structure that seems to really work. And the structure is that when you come together, go through the following steps. When you first come together, go around the group, each person taking as long as they need, to talk about the wins, the successes you've had since the last meeting. Okay? That creates a positive energy in the group. And it also keeps you accountable. You never let people talk about their failures, just their wins. Secondly, after you've done that, what we find useful is to negotiate for the amount of time each person is going to get as the focus in the group. For example, let's say there are 5 people in my support group and we're getting together for 2 hours on a Wednesday night. Then we've got 2 hours, and maybe out of that 2 hours, an hour and a half is going to be for support time, and the rest are these structured things like sharing your wins, and at the end you're going to share appreciations for each person in the group. So if 5 people have among them an hour and a half, which is 90 minutes, how are we going to divide that 90 minutes up among the 5 people? Maybe one week you come in and you say, look, man, I'm making a presentation to the board of directors of my company next week, and I want the entire hour and a half. And what I want to do is I want to give you my presentation for 45 minutes and then get feedback from you guys about how I could do it better. And we all go, sure, you got it. Or maybe someone else says, that's not going to work for me because, see, I found out 2 weeks ago that my son's using marijuana, and that's all I can think about, and I need some support from you guys about how I can deal with that. So I need at least 20 minutes. Can you handle giving up 20 minutes? Well, yeah, I can do that. So we negotiate for the time. Sometimes we just say everybody gets an equal amount of time. And then what we do, once it's our time, is we tell the group how we want to use the time. I want to share my goals with you and get feedback. I want to share a problem I'm having with my boss or my employees, and I don't know how to cope with them. I'd like maybe to role play or get some feedback from you. What would you do with that kind of person in that situation? And sometimes people say, I just want to talk and just be heard because I just need that, or I want support. I've even been in support groups, usually these are in California, but I've been in support groups where someone will say, I'm just burned out. I'd like to lie down on the floor and just have you guys give me a back massage for 5 minutes, and then I'll see what I want to do after that, And, I wouldn't do that necessarily in the boardroom of a large company, but in someone's home, that'd be fine. So you can use the support group for whatever you need it to be. And then at the end, again, make sure you go around and each person gets to appreciate other people in the group. We've done that 2 different ways. Sometimes we'll make each person a focus, and then the other 4 people will bombard them with what they appreciate about them, kind of like brainstorming. Or sometimes we'll just go around and each group member will get a minute or 2 or 3 or 4 and tell the other people what they like about them. Either way works. And then the last thing you have to do is schedule. Then the last thing you have to do is schedule the next meeting. Most support groups fall apart. If you've ever been in a support group, most of them go for a couple months and they die. And the reason they die is because they don't follow a structure where everybody every week feels like they're getting their needs met. As long as people are getting their needs met, they'll keep showing up. But if you start getting real informal and just hanging out, it loses its value.
Are there any easy ways you can give yourself a self-esteem check? And are there any quick picker-uppers that you can give yourself when you find yourself slipping in that area?
Okay, good question. Thank you. I like to think of self-esteem as, basically, are you feeling good about yourself? And in my seminars, I'll often ask people just to decide on a scale of 1 to 10 how good your self-esteem. And simply by asking that question, people usually go 1, 3, 7, 10. Sometimes they'll go -10, and you have a real quick sense of where you are. A couple things you can look at, though, in your life to see how your self-esteem goes. I have a friend named Sid Simon, and he talks about 6 signals that your self-esteem is slipping. So I'll share those with you. The first one he says is if you're dropping your exercise program. In other words, if you're normally someone who exercises and you find you're not doing that, it's a way of saying I'm not taking care of myself, and you take care of things you value. In other words, if you had a $500 or these days it'd probably be $50,000 Ming Dynasty vase, you'd take real good care of it. Okay? And so if your body is part of you and you're not taking care of it, then that's one signal. If your body's a part of you and you're not taking care of it, that's one signal that your self-esteem is slipping. The other one is if you've been involved in friends and support groups, and if you're not spending time, if you drop out of your support group or you're not spending time with your friends, this is a good signal that your self-esteem is dropping. A drop in time management would be the third one. In other words, if you're starting to get sloppy about returning phone calls, organizing your day, setting goals, it's another good signal. The fourth one is an increase of what we call couch potatohood. It's like all of a sudden you're spending lots of time watching TV. I know kids who'll go to college and all of a sudden they sleep 12 hours a night, then they watch TV in the dorm, and it's like they're very uncomfortable. They feel inadequate to the situation, and what they do is basically numb out about it. And you do that by sleeping and by television. Another one is what we call your mouth discipline collapses. And what we mean by that is when the highest level of conversation is about whether or not the white stuff in the middle of an Oreo cookie is better than the white stuff in the middle of a Hydrox cookie. And all of a sudden, it's like, food and eating becomes the main thing. I don't know if any of you have ever done this. You get a half gallon of ice cream, and you take it out of the refrigerator, and you're just going to have a bite, right? But then all of a sudden, you have to kind of smooth off the sides, and then you got to eat all the ice cream so you can flatten down the middle, And then it's getting a little soft on the side, so you scoop a little of that out, and then you got to eat it off a little more. And pretty soon, you've eaten the whole half gallon of ice cream. When things like that start happening, that's another good signal that self-esteem is dropping. And finally, is when your sexuality is totally out of whack. And that means like maybe you haven't been in a nurturing, sensual relationship with someone for 5 or 6 months, and if you're not in a relationship, at least maybe getting a massage at the Y or something like that. Or if you've become on the other end of the continuum, like that's all you can think about is sex. Because sex is one of the ways we get affirmed and nurtured that we're okay. And that can become like, if you're, Conan the Destroyer out in search of the conquest every night, and you can figure something's going on in terms of your self-esteem. Now, in terms of what can you do to pick it up, I would say there are a couple of things that are in terms of quick picker-uppers. And I tell people that what you should do is create a self-nurturing list. In other words, in a time when you feel good about yourself, make a list of things you know that when you do, you feel good and they nurture you. For example, for me, they're called browse in a bookstore. Okay? Listen to Cajun music. Always uplifts me. Listen to comedy tapes. I love to do that. Walking on the beach. I love to do that. Reading a really good, not a spy novel so much, but an adventure novel. I get into police novels. These are things that just take me off, and I'm happy when I do that. For other people, it might be taking a bubble bath by themselves in a room with a candle or something, just kind of getting into a very relaxed space with themselves. For someone else, it might be going to a certain restaurant or cooking their favorite meal or listening to Beethoven or to, Elton John, whoever your person is. But just do some things that can take care of yourself. Now, if you're in the office, and you've only got the lunch break to do this, what are some things you can do? Again, you can listen to a tape, a motivational tape, a comedy tape, a music tape. Get out of the space. If you're feeling bad someplace, then get out of there. Call up a friend that you know will nurture you, okay? You can meditate. You can exercise. One of the big things we found is when you're depressed, depression usually means you're pressing down energy that wants to be expressed. Usually it's anger or hurt. But one way to get that energy moving instead of being depressed, because as people get depressed, what do? They pull the blinds, they sit in a chair, they don't move. And when you don't move, energy gets stuck. And just like in a stream, when you watch a stream, if you have those little backwaters, where it gets all green in the water because it's not flowing and the mosquitoes breeding there and all that, the same thing happens in your body. When energy doesn't move, it kind of circles in on itself. And you get in this kind of downward cycling depression. So anything that's action-oriented that'll take you outside of yourself, like, joining the running club and getting out and running and do that. I know people that do that every day at lunch, or playing racquetball. I used to play, when I worked at the Job Corps Center in Iowa, I played racquetball 4 days a week at lunchtime. And it always got me charged up again no matter what was going on. Got my energy moving. And lastly, I would say, be of service to someone else. Do anything that gets you out of you, because when you make a contribution, you feel good about yourself, and your focus is off you, and it's on them. And if you're making a service, the other thing that often happens is you go, I thought I had it bad. Look at this person that I'm serving. So, those are some real quick things I think that you can do.
You can't always maintain constant self-esteem. When your self-esteem is hurt, how much do you allow yourself to feel that? I think it's natural to feel it. Where's that line where you stop allowing yourself to feel it?
Mm-hmm. I think feeling your feelings is critical to self-esteem. Okay? So, in other words, if you feel hurt, let yourself experience the hurt. If you feel sad, let yourself experience the sadness. If you feel angry, let yourself experience that. Self-esteem is partially a feeling. See, it's partially an evaluation. It's a mental process, but it's also a feeling. I feel good, about me, in me, within my body. And whenever I block the flow of a feeling, I create that stagnant energy you were just talking about. So what I want to do is learn to express my feelings in ways that don't hurt me and don't hurt other people. Like if I'm angry and I put my hand through a wall, because I'm angry, we see guys do that in bars, they get a little drunk and they put their hand through a wall. Well, that gets the anger out of you, but also hurts your hand. Also hurts the wall, breaks the mirror, and eventually if you hit someone, it hurt them. So I want to learn how to express my feeling without hurting me or someone else. Now the sadness part, there's a natural grieving that goes on when you lose something. Let's say you lose a promotion, or you lose the job you wanted, or a client, or your girlfriend, or your brother goes away, whatever it is, to allow yourself to experience the grief for that. But here's where I want to make the distinction. Natural grieving, natural loss, natural hurt and pain is kind of like, it happens, there's an intense peak, and then it calms down, and then it's gone. We see little kids do this. They'll bump their knee on a coffee table, and they scream wildly for like a minute or two. And then all of a sudden, they take a few breaths, and they stop, and then they go on. Whereas adults will do something like they'll hit their knee and they'll go, and they tighten up their jaw and they're trying to hold it all in, and they don't just let it out, see? And so usually what happens is that comes from parents saying things like, don't be a little baby, stop the crying, why don't you grow up? And so pretty soon we start locking down on the feelings, and then we have to pay therapists thousands of dollars to learn how to just be ourselves again. So if you find that a negative feeling is hanging on for a long time, then it's getting into what we call neurotic pain, neurotic guilt, neurotic sadness, and it's usually caused by what we call a false belief. For example, if somebody leaves me and I think, there'll never be anyone like that again, I'll never be happy again, my life is over, all that kind of stuff, that's not true. There are millions of people on the planet, all kinds of people you can get love from, all kinds of people you can have fun with and be nourished by, etc. So it's that thinking then that starts to prolong, if you will, the pain. And that's when, if you're doing that, you need to either change your thinking or get into counseling or get some external help that can help you do that. But self-esteem does not mean feeling good all the time. Self-esteem means loving yourself even when you feel badly. It means loving yourself even when you make a mistake, loving yourself even when you're depressed, loving yourself even when you're so angry you want to kill somebody. It means that you accept yourself fully and your emotions are part of you. Let me say one more thing about that. I have a friend named Dr. Peggy Bassett, and she's a minister of a church in Orange County. And she and I both applied to be on the California State Task Force to promote self-esteem and personal and social responsibility, which was a task force that was created by the legislature. And I got accepted and she didn't. And I remember calling her up. There were 421 applications for like 25 positions. And I thought, sure, she'd get accepted because I thought she was probably more qualified than I was to be on the task force. And when she didn't get accepted, I saw her at her church about a month later, and I said, how did you feel about not getting accepted? See, this would be a chance to feel bad and sad and miserable and all that. She said, oh, I felt great. I said, how come? She said, I just figured God had something better in store for me than being on that task force. See, and I think it's an attitude you hold that, there's something out there better for me. If something is taken away, well, that must mean I'm getting better for, getting ready for something else. I used to work at a Job Corps center, and it was closed down. And it was my first real grown-up job, where I was like the manager of a division and everything. And I lost my job and lost my income, and I started to get really depressed. And I went into Chicago, and I was in a seminar on self-esteem and what they called then achievement motivation. And this guy and I were talking at lunch, and he said that he was looking for someone to take this achievement motivation program into the inner city and work with inner city youth. And they had trouble finding anyone. Everyone they knew who worked out in the suburbs hadn't had any experience. And I said, gee, I work in the inner city. I used to teach at an all-black high school on the south side of Chicago. I have a lot of experience with those kids and those teachers. Great, why don't you hire me? And about a month later, they hired me at almost twice my salary, see? And I had perks you wouldn't believe. I could go to any seminar, anywhere, fly first class, be in the biggest hotel room, all expenses paid, never have a question asked, see? And so W. Clement Stone, who's the guy that hired me, had this phrase that every negative event holds within it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. So if you start holding that belief, then when something negative happens, you go, wow, what's the opportunity that this is? Instead of, oh, bummer, my life's going down the tubes. See, I knew it never works out. My mother was right. I am the slug of the universe, and on it goes.
How do you change your belief system? How do you change your attitude so that you have a good attitude about something?
Okay, that's a great question. And there are a number of ways to do it. What I found most effective is, first of all, to ask myself, what do I currently believe, okay, and how is that limiting to me? In other words, what's the limiting belief? And then how does it limit me? Then the next question is, how would I rather be? What belief would I have to believe to be like that? Okay, let's take an example. I have a limiting belief that I should always be prim and proper in corporate settings, okay? How does that belief limit me? It stops me from being playful and spontaneous and creative. How would I rather be? Playful, spontaneous, and creative. What would I have to believe in order to do that it's okay to be playful in a corporate setting? Okay, so now I know what the new belief is. Then I have to ask myself, how do I get that into me? And since a belief is usually held as a set of words in the mind, okay, but there also may be images and feelings, if you will, that are attached to them. So I can work at it on 3 levels. I can go in and I can start by using an affirmation called, it's okay to be playful in corporate settings. In fact, it's probably good to be playful in corporate settings. And then I'll say that over and over. It's okay to be playful in corporate settings. It's great to be playful in corporate settings. I am enjoying myself being playful in corporate settings. And I would repeat that maybe for 3, 4, 5 minutes every morning, every night right before I go to bed, every morning when I first get up. Usually these days I will pay a calligrapher, usually about $10 or $15, to actually calligraphy the affirmation for me, and I'll put it on my bathroom mirror. I may get it shrunk down to a little wallet card, put it on the dashboard of my car. So I'm going to see this over and over, okay? And if I keep repeating that enough, it starts to move it. Then the next thing I do is visualize what would it look like if I was being playful in a corporate setting, okay? And then thirdly, how would I feel? So I say the affirmation, see the picture, and hear the words. Now there's some advanced technology and belief changes which has come out through something called neuro-linguistic programming. You may want to read a book by Richard Bandler, I believe. And he gives you several techniques in there to change a belief. One of them is that for you, if I asked you to close your eyes and tell me a belief you have, what would happen is you'd start to tell me it feels a certain way, and I'd say, well, are there any pictures associated with it? And then I'd ask you what they call submodalities. How close is the picture? Is it color? Is it black and white? Is it glossy? Is it grainy? And then what I would do is I would have you take your new belief, I would have you change that belief, put the picture far away, make the voice sing-song, and then I'd take the new belief and use the same technology in terms of it's going to be glossy, it's close, it's color, and create a new image in your mind because your beliefs are stored in that modality. You understand what I mean by that? So that's how I'd begin to change the beliefs. And then finally, I would act on the belief and then discover how the universe responds to my action and find out that, in fact, when I'm playful, people love it, see, because it allows their little kid to come out. So then I'd get feedback, and that would reinforce my taking on the new belief.
Is there such a thing as healthy anger, and if so, how do you direct that in a more positive mode?
Yes, there's definitely healthy anger, if you will, and I think there's also what I might call not necessarily unhealthy anger, but perhaps useless anger. You know, like maybe we call it resentment, anger that lingers for a long time, like you're still angry at someone for something they did 20 years ago. But if something is blocking you toward getting toward where you want to go, and is thwarting your sense of expression or your sense of fulfilling basic needs inside yourself, anger is an appropriate response. Now, underneath all anger, there's usually hurt. So we need to look inside and get more vulnerable with it as well, and then go down into what's the underlying want that's being thwarted. So I can express my anger in a way. The second part of your question was something like, how can I do it in a way that's, not going to hurt me and be effective in an environment and so forth, would be, depends on who the person is you're talking about. Some people, for instance, can't handle anger. Maybe they got beaten up a lot as a little kid, so if someone gets angry at them, they just shut down, or they get real defensive. So I learned that that's not an effective approach with that person. Other people can handle it. They like to just kind of get in there and slug it out, not physically, but, yell and scream, whatever, and then everyone feels released and feels good, and it's great. Very rarely do I find the situation where both people love that, but if it happens that way, that's great too. What I found is the best way to express my feelings to someone so they can hear it is, when you blank, I feel blank because blank. What I would like is blank. So when you are late, I feel like you don't care about me, and then I feel sad and I feel unimportant because I want to be cared about. What I want from you is either to tell me you care about me and your being late wasn't personal, or I'd like you to be on time, so that I can share the anger, the hurt that's underneath it, and then I can share the desire I have for, because if someone's getting in my way, like someone on my staff is keeping me from moving ahead with the vision of the company or my vision, I need to not let that happen. And sometimes anger is an appropriate way to express that. Sometimes it isn't. Really, the communication has twofold. One is to get the anger out of you. Okay, so you've got to make sure that happens. And if it's inappropriate to do it in the corporate setting, then go play racquetball and pretend the ball's the guy's head and keep hitting it, until you feel complete with that. Someone even said what they did once is they wrote someone's name on the sole of their shoe, and then every time they took a left step, they thought, grinding them into the ground, got it out of their system. Now, there's a higher level to play with this, and not everybody's ready to do that, but it's kind of a developmental thing, but let me just share it with you. And that is to realize that underneath all anger, there's fear. See, if I'm angry, again, at you for being late, the fear is either that I'm not important, or the fear is that something bad's going to happen because we're going to get somewhere late, like we're going to miss the contract, or, all the food's going to be eaten, or whatever. So it's, again, based on some sense of lack inside, that somehow I don't have enough, and that what you're doing is stopping me from getting what I need, and the universe is limited, and there'll never be another opportunity again. See, so I get panicked, in a sense. And we see people, they literally have anxiety attacks, and they panic themselves. But if you realize that you're capable of handling any situation, you can always recreate anything you want in terms of abundance, wealth, opportunities, possibilities, etc. And then you look in and you really examine the fear. Usually the fear is unfounded. So it's a switch you go. I'm angry. What am I really afraid of? Am I willing to be that vulnerable and admit my fear? What would it take for me to get my need met so I wouldn't have to be afraid anymore? And then you're not having these explosions. You can become assertive, but you're not flying off the handle. People that are have a chip on their shoulder or a short fuse usually have a lot of unexpressed anger at the past from their childhood, where they got limited a lot by a parent or by a teacher or a football coach, whatever. And they really need to work that out in therapy, because they're getting angry at you when the real target is their mother or their dad. And they can never complete it with you because you're not the target. So those are just some ideas about that. Is that helpful? Okay.
How can you keep yourself up all the time, or should you?
Well, I don't think anybody can stay up all the time. At least I haven't met him yet. Maybe there's somebody sitting in a cave in India somewhere who's able to do that, but I haven't met him. And I've met people from India who can't do that as well. My belief is that there's no such thing as up unless the opposite exists. In other words, we wouldn't have the concept up if there wasn't down. We couldn't talk about night if there wasn't also day. There'd just be an ongoingness, okay? So anything that has an extreme to it, there's going to be an opposite extreme. And what I found is that you have to learn to ride the roller coaster of life, and that, again, as I said, self-esteem is not dependent on necessarily being up or down. It's knowing you're okay when you're up and down. What I have found is that you can kind of collapse, if you will, the length of the valley. In other words, you can round out the hump. So instead of going down 29 feet, you're only going down 5 feet. And some of the techniques for that are, again, using things like meditation, affirmations, changing your belief systems, reframing things in terms of the positive. So, again, the negatives aren't seen as a bummer, that they're seen as opportunities and possibilities. Also, see, I used to teach that suffering was optional, and I really believed that, that it was an optional thing. You didn't have to suffer. But I've come to believe that there's what I call legitimate suffering. Childbirth is usually legitimate suffering. The death of a loved one is legitimate suffering. Being hit in the head with a baseball is legitimate suffering. And so whenever there's loss or some kind of impact on your life, to experience that as suffering is okay. I think it was Carl Jung, great psychiatrist, said that neurosis is the avoidance of legitimate pain and suffering. Because, again, we numb off because we don't want to feel the pain. Drug abuse and alcohol abuse, sexual abuse, workaholism, all of these things are ways to numb out the pain. And so as long as we're busy or we're in an altered state, we don't feel the pain. Someone else said the way out is through. The way out of pain is to experience the pain. And as long as you avoid it, you can't get rid of it. Some people that are highly evolved spiritually can transmute energy. In other words, they can transform the negativity into the positive. But most of us don't have that ability. And so until we do, it's just called breathe and experience it. And really all you have to do to experience any emotion is breathe it. Just breathe. Keep feeling the feeling, and eventually it goes away. In other words, have you ever known anyone that cried for 9 years without stopping? It's impossible. Nobody can cry forever. Nobody can stay angry forever. In other words, a feeling, if you just have it, will wash through you. And sometimes it'll come around again for a second and third turn, but it'll be less each time. It's kind of like a ping pong ball. If you drop it, each time it bounces, the bounce is a little shorter until eventually it stops bouncing and it just sits on the floor. Emotions are like that. The fear we have is that we can't handle the feeling, that somehow we'll explode, die, melt, whatever. But you can handle the feeling. You just think you can't. Because when you were a little kid, for some reason, you got in trouble for feeling it. Your dad said, if you don't stop crying, I'll give you something to really cry about. Don't get angry at me, young man, that kind of thing. And so we pulled in our feelings because our survival was threatened by feeling them. But now we have to re-own them, if you will.
How do you deal with a person or an environment where they expect you to constantly be up?
I think Well, a number of ways. One is I would use that as an opportunity to grow myself in terms of constantly seeing where I'm not up. Okay? And maybe there are times when I'm being down because of my negative thinking and, fears and beliefs and so forth. But also give myself permission to feel what I feel when I feel it and not play a role for somebody else. In other words, be me. And if they don't like it, tough. I mean, as long as your job's not at stake, if they're not going to fire you for that, then your job is, in other words, you weren't born to live up to other people's expectations. You were born to be you and express you fully. And when you die, I don't think there's going to be someone at the pearly gates saying, how come you weren't Moses? They're going to say, how come you weren't you? And so be you. And there's a lot of pressure from the crowd. Now, the other thing I would say to balance that is a little technique we call acting as if. Have you ever had the experience that maybe you were in a really funky mood and then someone came over like a salesperson, so you decided to be nice and pleasant and all of a sudden, and you thought when they left you'd go back to being funky, but somehow being nice and pleasant kind of took over and you stayed with it? So sometimes acting as if you're up or pleasant or loving or whatever, literally it kind of takes over and it's in you. And so acting as if can be a way to get out of a negative feeling. But again, you have to just kind of feel what's right for you. And for each person it's different. Each person has their own rhythm of withdrawal and contact, of how long their feelings last. Some people can get angry and forget it in a minute. Some people, if someone get angry at them, 3 days later they're still upset by it. And they say, well, it was easy for you, you just let it go, but I can't do that. See? So we have to honor our individual differences.
I'm just curious, so if the person more or less pushes you to, you have to be up or else.
Or else what?
Or else it shows up on your review. Or they don't say something and, well, it would. Like a month later, it's on your review. It's a strike against you if you're not constantly up and happy. And
So you have to decide,
how do you deal with that person?
Right, you have to decide, are you living your life for positive reviews or are you living your life to feel good? See, if you're living your life for approval, then other people's judgments and demands will always run you. Okay? And sometimes a supervisor will be trying to do something to motivate you, to get you to be more positive, a team player and all that. And maybe that's appropriate. And sometimes it isn't. Let's say your mother just died a week ago. Being up all the time in the job is impossible. It's an unrealistic demand. Okay? So sometimes it's just called, I hear what you want, I'm not going to give it to you, and you can do whatever you want, and that's who I am. You can either love me, fire me, whatever it is, but that's who I am. You have to live with that. And then they do what they do with it. And you always have the opportunity of challenging a review and, writing a letter of, disagreement to go in your file and all of that.
Your friend who, when he asks his employees if they don't respond that they're up, he asks them for $50.
Right.
And I was just going to ask you to respond in connection with what you're talking about to that.
Well, see, Ed Foreman, who does that, it's a game they play, and they've all agreed to play. See, everyone in the system that works for him has bought into the philosophy that being up is a choice. Okay? Now, if you buy that system, then you live your life based on that philosophy. And that's an okay game to play. And it's a game that will probably have as much good to it as any possible negative. There is the possibility among positive thinking orientations that you sometimes deny the fact that there is a negative shadow side to our personality. And when you deny the negative, it will eventually get you. It'll come out crooked and weird. For example, we're now seeing, TV ministers, Eastern gurus by the tons who are preaching chastity and celibacy, etc. And it turns out that they're having all kinds of sexual affairs and acting out in money, and instead they're teaching poverty and yet they're doing greed and so forth. Well, anytime you deny a natural need and desire, I'm not saying you have to act on it, but deny even having it. You're so self-righteous, I don't have those needs. The needs will sneak out in ways that you don't like, and you'll try to deny that, but then you'll be crippled by it because it'll be, I couldn't control myself. And so that is the way that negativity will get you. And so, you end up drinking about it. You end up doing drugs about it. You end up overeating about it. So when you don't deal with feelings directly, they basically sabotage your physiology. They sabotage your relationships. They sabotage your performance. So I am a positive thinker, but I balance that with knowing that we have feelings and that we have to own those and experience them.
Even if you work in a generally positive environment, why could you still have a low self-esteem level? Could it come from always being told, you're doing a great job, but...
Well, there's kind of two questions there, and let me answer them individually. Self-esteem doesn't come from your work environment necessarily. If you have a great, positive, loving environment, but you feel bad about yourself, then you're bringing that in from outside. So then what you got to do is look at where's that coming from, okay? And again, it's usually coming from either your childhood or you're in a toxic relationship. mean, I know a lot of people that go home and their husband or wife is constantly putting them down, telling them they're not good enough, you weigh too much, you shouldn't be eating that, why don't you get an extra, I mean, who needs that? If you get enough of that day after day after day and you're not doing things inside yourself to counteract that, you can get brought way down. So some of the things you can do to counteract it are like doing daily affirmations. One of the exercises we talked about earlier was the mirror exercise, where every night before you go to sleep, you talk to yourself in the mirror and you say loving, positive things to yourself. In other words, if there's no one in your environment to do nurturing, stroking, validating things for you, then you do it for yourself. You can do it in addition to other people as well. I keep saying this, but I'll say it over and over. I think meditation is one of the greatest keys to inner peace and self-confidence and self-esteem. Because when you meditate, whether it's Christian meditation or Buddhist meditation or doing, Jewish meditation, doesn't matter what form particularly to me. But what I find is that what happens is you get into a space where you really are centered. And in that centered space, you know that you're okay. In other words, you're totally in touch with your wholeness. And when you come out of that, the longer you've meditated, the longer you can hold it. Meaning if you've been meditating for 2 or 3 years, you can meditate for 20 minutes and go all day on that. Whereas if you just started, it might last an hour and then you're back in your old self. So I strongly recommend. And a real simple meditation is simply to close your eyes and say, like, I am love, I am joy, I am enough. And just keep repeating that over and over and over. And what happens is you actually get very, very centered and you get very, very calm inside yourself. And then people can come at you and say all kind of things and you just go, oh, that's just, my dad, he's always doing that. I don't have to take it personally, as opposed to getting all plugged in about it. If someone's telling you you're doing a good job, but, okay, whenever the mind hears a but, it instantly cancels out the first thing it heard. You're really pretty, but, the only thing you can hear is what comes after, You did a great job, but, So if you are going to give people two kinds of feedback, it was a great report and there are some opportunities for improvement, or it could be improved this way, use the word and. Separate it out. You did a great job. Here's what was great about it. Boom, 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 and boom. And would you be interested in some feedback about how it could be even better? Sure. Yeah, I want to get better. See? So it comes after a whole lot of validation. And then we call them in our company improvement opportunities. We never say people made a mistake, you did it wrong, you screwed up. It's always, there are improvement opportunities here. Are you interested in what they are? And sometimes I'll have a staff person say, not today. Can we talk about it tomorrow? I feel real fragile. Fine. Let's just focus on it. It was a great job. We got the order, whatever.
This completes Questions and Answers Part 1 from Self-Esteem and Peak Performance with Jack Canfield. Now, please replace this cassette with Side 11 as we continue with Questions and Answers Part 2.